That's a lie. It's always party time. Chat again. Okay, here we go. So like I said, I'm going to be talking about building automation engineers from scratch. The idea that you have a manual tester and you want to move into automation, or what does it look like to add automation to your toolbox? My name is Jenny. I'm from North Carolina. You can maybe tell by my accent, you maybe can. It depends on how thick it's going to be tonight. Human interfacing is my favorite thing. That moment where computers and people come together and magic happens or magic doesn't happen, that is my sweet spot, and that is my absolute favoriteest thing. I have been speaking at conferences, speaking at meetups. I run a conference in North Carolina. I run a meetup in North Carolina. I love speaking. I believe everybody should speak at least once in their lifetime. So if you want to speak at your local meetup, let me know. I will absolutely help you with it. My pronouns are she and her. That's not a slide I should have had in here. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few things today. I'm going to go through a list of assumptions that I make whenever I give this talk. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my abridged history. I'm going to talk about setting expectations and creating your framework for success, then facing some of the challenges that come up. Finally, there's going to be an absolute hype track at the end about why automation is super cool. Okay. You never start from zero. I know I call this building automation engineers from scratch, but even when you're baking from scratch, you don't go out and harvest the wheat yourself and grind it up and breed the chickens and get the eggs. No, there is something you start with. So as test engineers, as quality assurance people, as humans in the tech space, what do we start with? So I'm going to make some assumptions about this talk in general. I'm going to assume that there's a group of manual testers, or you are a manual tester, interested in moving towards automation. You have some time and resources to apply to the adventure. You may have some kind of support system or mentoring system in place, but at least have some people that are willing to help you. And you're willing to make a plan and execute on that plan. When it comes to humans, every tester is a subject matter expert in her field. Every single one of them. Manual testing is still incredibly important and vital to the health of our applications. Also, not everybody wants to be an automation engineer, and change is scary. I'm going to harp on those last two things a whole bunch towards the end, well, probably towards the middle, because I think it's really important. So, who am I? Okay, like I said, Jenny. So when I was a baby test engineer, when I was just starting out, I was super happy. I really, really, really loved manual testing. I just loved going through things and being the person, and it was just fed my little tiny dark soul. And my boss said, well, you need to learn to code. You need to learn to automate. You need to be able to do UI automation. I'm like, wow, that's great. I don't want to. I'm not going to. Screw you and the horse you rode in on. I'm not doing it. Then I got laid off, completely unrelated to that conversation, I think. And I went to my next job, which was like 90% manual on this horrible legacy system that was in no way created to be tested. So I still didn't do any. I just didn't do any because I didn't have to and I didn't want to. And then I got my current job, and they were really looking for somebody that wanted to move into automation. And I had been to enough conferences and given enough talks and talked to enough people by that point that I understood that adding automation to my tool set was how I was going to proceed through my career. It's how I was going to give myself the space to be the test engineer that I really, really wanted to be. I did turn in the test project for this job and didn't hear back from them for 3 or 4 weeks. So I was like, oh, I did it so terribly, they're just never going to talk to me again. But it was over Christmas and someone was on vacation. So anyway, I got the job. And yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing. What am I doing? When I started working in automation, it was very scary for me. And one of the things that I found scariest was this idea of change. So I'm like I said, I'm gonna talk about that a little bit more. I got through that. And one of the major ways I got through it was by having a good support system and by starting to think about what does automation look like? What's it for? What does it mean? So I landed this job and I started becoming the team lead for a group that really needed automation on our project. So we went from zero automation on our project to an almost fully automated iOS test suite in about 6 weeks, because I know, right? Because we had people that we could dedicate some time, we could put them at this and just do it. And I'm going to talk a bit more about what we did when we get to the framework for success part, I think. But one of the main things that I wanted to start with was the expectations. We have a lot of expectations on people when we talk about moving from manual to automation. And we really need to get out in front of that. So one of the things I did with my team was I started talking about expectations, and I started talking about, what does it feel like to do this? What are we looking for? What do we want? And my first expectation that I want to talk about today is the perception of ability. I said that every tester is a subject matter expert in her field. When you're an expert in what you believe testing to be and you're asked to do a completely different type of testing, it can feel very jarring. Suddenly you're not an expert. Suddenly your 15, 20, 30 years of experience doesn't feel relevant anymore because it's not the tappity taps. You haven't had to ask for help in years. You've been the one giving the help. You're good at this, but why aren't you good at this? I didn't realize I was supposed to know everything by my second rodeo. Feels like a real low number of rodeos. Got to be honest, y'all. I didn't throw that in just for Texas, but I should have. Should have a little cowboy hat on it. So the adjustment here that I want to make is respect the manual. Manual testers have an incredible set of skills. They're built up over years and years of work. No one knows the code. No one knows the process of moving through the user flows like someone whose job it has been to move through the user flows. Automation complements. Automation does not replace the manual tester. The manual tester tells everyone what she thinks is going on, and those are the flows that maybe we're going to automate. So by respecting the manual, by making sure that people understand you are not replacing your skill set, you're augmenting your skill set, you're going to get a lot farther. And this is another part of it. You need to reset the mindset. You are not dropping your manual skills to pick this other skill up. You are adding something on top. You're putting those little decorative roses on top of the cake. You are making yourself better because you're giving yourself a little bit more space to be human because you've automated something. You also can't really expect someone to be just as good at writing code, at doing the tappity taps, as they have been at manual testing. But you do need to expect them to apply those stellar manual testing skills to the business of writing code. They're not going to turn out tests as fast as somebody who's been coding her entire life. But like I said, no one knows the system from the user's perspective like someone who's been the user. And this is incredibly valuable to start pulling into your automation. It lets you start automating the right things, not just any things. And lose your fear of not being technical enough. You don't need to know how to code to start down the path of automation. You are an incredibly technical person, even if you are told that you're not. Just being able to write code, just being able to do something that people have deemed technical isn't the only way to be technical. And that's incredibly important. And please reinforce that with all of your friends. And probably your enemies too, let's be honest. The next expectation is the perception of velocity. Velocity is an incredibly key metric for a lot of people that don't understand velocity. When you're starting out with something, it feels really slow. It feels like you're not doing it right. But here's the thing. Velocity is a feeling, Officer Howard. Velocity is not objective. It is not something, you can't look at a child and say, why aren't you more like your sister? You know that hurts kids when you do it. So why would we do that to professional humans? It's subjective to where you start out and where you're going. You can't expect someone who has not been doing this her entire career to be as fast as someone who has. You might not meet your goals. We do need to set goals, but it's a conversation to have. Why didn't we meet our goals? Why does the velocity not look like what we expect? What do we need to reset? And in general, you're going to need to reset your expectations for how fast things are going to get done, because you need to understand that your testers are learning. Even just the one test, the two tests that they turn out, that doesn't describe the full amount of work that they've done to get those tests into place. There's learning the syntax, there's learning control statements, there's probably researching how to actually find the element that they want to find on the page because no one's put in accessibility IDs. Don't fall into the trap of comparison. Make sure that everyone's velocity can stand on its own and that you're not judging and hurting people by telling them they're not good enough. The next expectation I want to talk about is the perception of success. If you look, I did that again. If you look closely, most overnight successes actually took a really long time to come into being. And we need to understand that success isn't going to happen overnight. You're not going to suddenly be perfect at this. You're not suddenly going to have your giant test suite. Everything's awesome. We need to define our success metrics. It can look like something different for a whole lot of people, and it can look like something different week to week to week. And you're going to feel like people are like, are you done yet? And then what does done even mean? If we haven't sat down and defined it, we don't understand what done is. Here's a couple of success metrics that I really like to use in the past. Everyone on the team put a PR in. That one's pretty fun. Sometimes, depends on how big your team is. The golden path or happy path is automated. The team can now do something interesting. This week, last week, I learned how to write tests to test if a database migration worked properly. That's pretty cool. That feels like success. I did it wrong, but I learned how to do it right in the future, and that's what's really important. There's a certain number of tests. We got tests running in CI. Or my personal favorite, no one cried this week. Good luck. When we define the success, when we say this is what success looks like, we can actually move towards it in a reasonable, logical kind of way. We can say, okay, we are making forward progress. Maybe the velocity isn't exactly what we expected, but we're moving towards the point we want to be at because we've defined that point. Success should be individual and it should be team-based. I really love to give individual people goals or ask them what their goals are, and then have a goal for the team, because it helps reinforce the idea that this is a whole team approach. It's not just Jenny needs to do 5, Robert needs to do 5, together they need to do 10. Maybe Jenny's only going to do 2 this week, so maybe she needs Robert to do a couple of extra, and having that conversation can be really important too. And you learn a lot about development. Too much.
So I actually have a question about metrics. So what, do you have any advice if you're being given like bad metrics to target? Like I'm thinking of, I was once on a test automation project where the goal was to like take the existing suite of manual tests and automate them. And success was measured by what fraction of those existing manual tests had been automated, which like, yes, I can see your face. You think that this was a bad thing. Yes, and like nobody could convince, management that there would be better ways.
A lot of that is going to come down to what your relationship with management is like. If they are 100% convinced that they are right and you can't have that conversation, my biggest advice is to get a new job and possibly burn the building down on your way out. If that metrics should always be a conversation. If you were being dictated to with metrics, the likelihood of you actually succeeding in those metrics is going to be incredibly low. So what that's saying is that they're not setting your team up for success. And that's really concerning on a whole lot of levels. If you're finding yourself up against metrics that you can't complete or that are bad metrics, I like to think of them as metrics as a weapon, not as a tool. So if you've got metrics that are being weaponized against you, if you can't have a conversation about why this is bad and what's going on, then there is a fundamental culture issue that you're going to have a hard time getting past. And generally what I personally do in that situation is start some kind of mutiny amongst the populace. Because if you can get enough people saying the thing, if you can get enough people kind of snowballing the effect, you can either make the being held to the metrics worthless or actually get some kind of change. But in general, anytime you are given a metric, if you can't push back and have a conversation on it, there's a deeper cultural issue that is at play that needs to be addressed. Does that answer your question, Jen?
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, it's not the best answer, but
no, I mean, yeah, like I didn't think there was going to be a good answer, but you know, I wanted to give you the opportunity. I did find another job for the curious.
The TLDR of my quality metrics talk is the only good metric is morale. Spoilers. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the framework for success. We've talked a bit about expectations, perceptions, and all that mess. What does it look like when we actually are empowered to succeed? How are we doing that? The first thing I want you to ask yourself is, what do you know? When I first started out learning how to code, learning how to be an automation engineer, my brain completely shut down. I'm like, I know nothing. I'm a blank slate. And that's not accurate. That's actually kind of harmful to you because you've got so many amazing things that you can apply to automation. It's a skill on top of your existing skills. You ain't starting from zero. You are not dropping that manual skill set to pick up automation. They are absolutely complementary. Everything you have done in your career, in your past, in your personal life, et cetera, is a stepping stone to making your automation better. If you've ever heard Ash Coleman give her everyday tester talk, she talks about this. She was a chef for a long time, and that made her a really good API tester because APIs are basically recipes. And if you don't follow the recipe, you don't get great results. Same with APIs. You also know how to use tools and language. If there's one thing a tester can do, it's use tools and communicate. These are incredibly important as you move into automation. You also know logic. You kind of have to be able to do the crazy things that users sometimes do. What's the logical path? Now, what are the people going to do that are not going to take the logical path? We can work these out. You've also got the ability to learn. Every time you start a new job, a new project, a new feature, a new something or other, you are learning something new. You are taking it in so that you can test that item. Your ability to learn is incredible as long as it's presented to you in a format that you can consume. And my favorite thing about testers is that we really do hold the mental model of the system in our minds. When you're doing development work, a lot of time you're super focused on something tiny. And as you start doing automation, you're going to find this is true. Like you're looking at just that test and you get so absorbed by it that sometimes you forget the bigger picture. And one thing that testers always have to do is keep that bigger picture in mind because that's how users move through the system and that's how we test through the system. So we hold that mental model and it is incredibly, incredibly powerful. The next question I want you to ask is, what do you need to know? And the answer is obvious, right? You need to know how to automate things. Well, kind of. I mean, that's one piece of it. You need to learn how to code. I caution against learning how to automate because there's a lot of cheats you can do with automation to get to the point you want to be at without really understanding what you're doing. So if you learn to code and you learn like what control structures are, how these things should be phrased, what pretty code looks like, it's actually going to do you a lot of good in the future because people are going to take your code more seriously. Also, incredibly important, learn the software development lifecycle at your company. How do features actually move through the software development lifecycle before it gets to you? This is important because automation should also move through that lifecycle. Yes, please test your tests. Also learn Git or whatever versioning tool your company uses. At some point, you are going to absolutely wreck your local version of your code base, and you need to be able to unwreck it. Or remember who can unwreck it for you. At my company, his name is Dan. So by learning what a couple of basic tools are or a couple of basic commands, you're going to really get a good idea of how to use Git, how to do these things, and unmess up your life. You also want to learn your IDE. I learned this super late. It turns out, believe it or not, the people that wrote IDEs really like writing code, so they wrote a bunch of stuff to make it easier. So learn some of the things that your IDE can do, learn how it can help support you as a code writer human. There are people in your company that really love their IDE of choice. Find them, become their friend, learn their delicious, delicious secrets. And write them down because you're not going to use their shortcuts as much as they use them. And the last thing, the major thing that I want you to remember is automation code is production code. Anything that tests production is production code, and it should be treated like production code. Don't take shortcuts. Write good, clean code, write maintainable code, write code that is in line with the coding standards of your company or the project that you're working in. If you write beautiful code, if you write nice code, it's going to be easier for developers and people outside your team to come in and talk to you about the code and say, hey, here's some stuff that maybe you should consider. And remember, if you wouldn't do it in production, don't do it in your test suite. I know sleeps are incredibly attractive. Don't put them in your test suite. That's a joke that you're going to get the third or fourth test you write. The next piece of your framework for success is how do you learn? Everyone learns differently. For me personally, I learn really great with a mentor or with pairing with other developers and testers. If you give me a course to work through, I'm going to fail it because I'm highly traumatized by my college experience. I recommend you find a mentor. Even if it's not somebody that's a one-on-one mentor with you, find someone who is interested in helping people learn to code and that you can bounce questions off of. Someone that you can ask that question that you think must be really, really dumb. Find a person you can ask that question. And even if they leave your company, still continue to be their friend. Set aside dedicated time for your PRs, for help, and for other tasks. With the group that we went from no suite to lots of suite in 6 weeks, we actually did 2-hour blocks of time that were specifically blocked off for testing. And this is back when we were in the office. And I booked a conference room. And for those 2 hours, no one was allowed to talk to the test team. And I know there's some people that are like, oh my gosh, we can't be like away from the team for that long. But spoiler alert, you probably can at least once a week. So we would block it off. We did Tuesday, Thursday 1 week, and then Monday, Wednesday, Friday the next week. So we actually had really a lot of time to work on it. That might not work for your team, but I do recommend at least 2 hours a week set aside to find someone to review your PRs, to review other people's PRs, to do the work of automation. Especially if you're primarily a manual tester at the moment, having that set aside time is really important. And I did see Tom asked, is there an IDE that is my favorite? No, I hate them all. Right now I use Android Studio and I use Xcode a lot because I work in mobile. I don't love them, but it's what the developers use and they can help me with it. So that's really important. The other thing, look for example automation projects. Pretty much every framework that's out there has some kind of example website or example thing that you can go through because that's how they show off and demo their automation suites. These example projects are going to tell you what they think good code looks like and some of the interesting things that you can do with their particular framework. If coursework works for you, there's tons of it. I highly recommend the Test Automation University. That's put out by Athlete Tools, totally free. Bazillions of courses on basically any framework or any kind of automation tidbits that you could imagine. And if there isn't something on your particular tidbit, maybe you can make a course for it. There's also games. Now, I actually learn really well with games, believe it or not. It's a lot like pairing. You're just pairing with a game, not a human. Stuff like Ruby Warrior or Code Katas or all of that stuff is really important to be able to, for me at least, to be able to understand how code affects real things. PR is a pull request or peer review. Basically, here's my piece of code. What do you think of it? Do you like this code? Do you not like this code? So it's a time to really go through your code and say, hey, what does it look like? What do you like? Test Automation University, or TAU. It's super great. The courses are really well done, they're well produced, and they're really fun. But yeah, games work for me, pairing works for me. Dedicated time is really super important. If coursework works for you, then set aside time to do that as well. Make it separate from your help time or your PR time, but set aside time to do that. And remember, practice makes permanent. Whatever you're doing right now, that's how you're gonna code in the future. The habits you make when you first start out are the habits you're gonna have until someone forcibly removes them from your cold, dead hands. My piano teacher used to love to say, practice does not make perfect. Practice makes permanent. And she's right. It's vital that we start out with good codes. It's vital that we play the piano nicely and don't break our knuckles. It's vital that we have good habits. Okay, that's it, right? We've got our framework for success. We've got all of these things. We're done, right? No, because as soon as you start doing automation as a manual tester, you're going to start having some massive challenges. And what's the first one? Well, getting deprioritized. That is the worst thing and the first thing that generally happens when you're moving from manual testing to adding automation in. People say, well, it's not important. We were doing fine with manual testing before. Well, here's the thing. We're not looking for just finishing the testing for this one project, right? We're looking for how can we add value across the entire software development lifecycle, the entire company, and how can we make this important to everyone? Here's how we meet this challenge. We make automation invaluable. We make it the way we test. Again, testers are subject matter experts in the realm of testing. No one's gonna sit you down and be like, so Lydia, I think we shouldn't do any boundary testing on this app. You know, really, let's just not do any comparison testing. Exploratory straight out, no ad hoc either. No one's gonna do that. No one's gonna sit there and be like, here's some test methodologies you're not allowed to use. Why do we let them do that to us with automation? And this is a point where you're gonna need to stand up to people and say, hi, I'm the expert. If you don't think I'm the expert, then that's a conversation we need to have. Admittedly, this is a difficult conversation to have, especially if you're just starting out, especially if you're a newer tester. So find someone that can help. Find someone that can stand behind you like a big giant bruiser and be like, the lady said, test automation. I find a senior developer is really helpful at this point, but you can also find a senior tester that can generally help. The other way to meet this challenge is remember that automation is just another tool. It really is very much a tool in the toolbox. Sure, it's a drill, not a screwdriver, but it is another tool. It is a piece of our testing repertoire. It is how we test, how we move through the system, and what we need to do to be successful as test engineers, as quality assurance people. If we can get to a point where instead of saying, oh, we're doing testing and automation, and we could just say, we're doing testing, we have actually moved into the realm of automation being another tool and automation being invaluable and vital to all of our projects. Here's my favorite challenge, because it's the one that I struggled with the most when I was starting out. I just don't want to. I've been doing great as a manual tester. This is what's enjoyable to me. I like it. And that's okay. But tough luck. Here's the thing. Software is changing and we need to change with it. We need to be able to pull these things in so we can test faster, more accurately, and better. One of the best ways to meet this is the whole team approach. You are not working in isolation. Even if you're the only person doing the thing you're doing, you have a team of professionals who are also working towards the same goal of beautiful, working, helpful, useful software. Someone in this group has the skills that you need to supplement what you're doing. Find them, nurture that relationship. And remember, I have such a girl crush on Lisa Crispin, so there's like 4 quotes from her in this. Automation is scary, and we want to work to get our whole team engaged rather than to specifically become a test engineer. By getting the whole team engaged and by realizing automation is just another tool, we move from the realm of throwing it over the wall to test engineering, or running out of runway for the airplane as we're building it. And we start to recognize that this is an entire group of people moving towards the same goal. And finally, professional development means change. The world is changing around us. Testing is so different today than it was when I started. Heck, it's different than it was 6 months ago, 12 months ago, 24 months ago. We are moving so much faster, and I don't know if y'all noticed, but there's a freaking pandemic on. I have so much more mental load right now, and the people on my team have so much more mental load, especially people with kids, people with spouses that work, people with parents, people who have all of this going on. It really is heavy. We're making more mistakes than we've ever made as far as software, as far as creation of things. So how can we help? How can we take some of that mental load off of our coworkers and off of ourselves? We can automate it. If we put automation in place, it is going to catch those small mistakes. It is going to catch things like, oh, login doesn't work all of a sudden, or the buttons have moved and we don't like that. We're going to catch these things using code, not using people, so we're not adding to the mental load of what's going on around us. And I think that is so incredibly important. And honestly, it's an argument that I've used in the past couple of months to get more time for test automation on projects. By removing the need for someone to do regression, by removing the need for someone to check, oh, are all the categories still there for this app? Do the buttons still work? By removing that need, we've removed an incredible amount of mental load, and I can put it towards other things, more important things. And maybe that means my knitting. Maybe it doesn't necessarily mean work. And that's also important. Automation gives us space to be human, not just at our jobs, but in our personal lives as well. And this is how we win. Humans that are better prepared for the challenges we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years means software is better prepared for these challenges and the changing nature of the humans around us. Software development isn't going to slow down. It hasn't, and it's only going to get faster. This is one of the ways we rise to meet the challenges of software in 5 to 10 years. This is one of the ways that we create an ecosystem in which we can be better humans, we can be more ethical, we can be more accessible, we can be better all around by adding automation in and by saying, hey, we've taken care of the small stuff. We've taken care of that piece of the mental load. Here is more space to do more interesting things, more interesting testing, more interesting development, riskier things even. This is how we meet the challenges of the next 6 months, 12 months, 5 years. Whew, that was a lot of words, y'all. Thanks for sticking it out. So we set some expectations and we talked about them. We talked about the framework for success, and we talked about some challenges that we're going to face. And what it looks like when we have automation in place and when we can be more human. This is for a different conference. I assume there's no evaluations. Any questions, y'all? Please feel free to drop them in chat or unmute yourself and let me have them. Yes, this is chocolate milk.
Hey, so I have a question. It's kind of vague, but so the place I'm a developer, and we're about to have a really big push to move to a completely automated CI/CD pipeline. And right now, our test phase is a 3-week regression manual test monstrosity. And the company that I work for has always kind of treated tests like a second-class citizen. The testers are always short-term contractors, but they finally seem to have seen the light, and they want to put resources and effort towards bringing on a test team that is not treated that way. And we definitely are going to push for automation. And I have interviews like this week. So right now they're looking for kind of low level people. They're not looking for, senior level people. So I'm just kind of like, what do I need to be looking for?
If you don't have any automation in place right now.
Not really. I mean, there's a couple of bits, but not really.
So I would look for people who are decent coders, but could be better. People that kind of have that tester mindset, because they need to be able to figure out what to automate first and where to get the most bang for their buck. Like, not just the most long running test, but what's easy, what's some low hanging fruit that we can grab and show some quick value. Maybe instead of 3 weeks, it's 3 weeks minus 2 days, and start whittling away at it like that. I would look for that. I would look for creative people. I would actually ask them to do mind maps about testing.
Okay.
Because what that'll show you, you're not just looking for someone that can write pseudocode. You want somebody that can think about test cases. So if you say, all right, here's login. How do you test login? Can you draw it with a mind map? What are the elements? What am I looking for? What are the error cases?
That's such a good idea. Okay.
They're gonna start showing you how they think, and they're gonna show you if they can pull these pieces out that are important. Once they've got the mind map, you can be like, okay, what of this is important? And you can do that online. I like the tool MindMup a lot for online mind mapping. But yeah, that'll show you how they think, and it'll show you if they can pull out the important pieces of test cases. I would also pair them with a developer. At least the first like 90 days, someone that they can specifically ask questions about the company, the code base, and the code that they're going to be writing. So, and good, not good, kind developers. So if I came to them and I'm like, I don't remember how to write an if statement, they're not going to be like, get out.
Yeah.
So look for somebody like that. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and so like Jenny, you touched on this a little bit in your talk, but like automation needs to be a whole team effort. It can't be just up to the automation engineers, and I think that's going to be doubly true in this case, where you're trying to build up a whole testing capability from scratch, and so you probably need to also get your developers involved in building and maintaining that automation, and then like once they're doing that, they'll care about what the testers are bringing to the table, and like they'll also have input for you on what you should look for in your hires.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have any choice but to have developers involved, because our data situation is
Yeah, and
one
so
of those
like,
things that the managers are just like, make it happen, and we're like, but okay.
yeah, and so after a sprint or two of having to like be responsible for some of this, they're going to feel some of the pain, and they're going to want somebody to like take over the worst parts. And like knowing what the worst parts are is a great place to start.
Oh, I'm good at finding that, so I can help with that, sure.
I also find that one of the easiest ways to get developers invested in test automation is to, like I said, pair them with a tester and have them teach that tester something, because then the tester's success becomes the developer's success. One of the things I'm the most proud of is every code base I've worked on in the past year, every developer I've worked with has helped with the automation. And that's just really, really important.
Cool. Thank you.
I saw a question for any tools that allow creation of test scripts that are not written as programs, graphical, maybe with drag and drop. There are actually quite a few codeless test writing tools. I'm not familiar with them because it's not something I use. But there's a few out there that are kind of interesting. They can tend to be expensive, although I think there's some newer ones that might be coming out of Europe that are going to be a little bit more affordable. But I really can't speak to them because it's just not something I use that much. Any other questions? Anything anyone wants to ask? Any particular, oh, this is actually one of my favorite questions. Would you recommend any particular programming language or scripting? And my answer is whatever your developers are using. Because what that does is it increases your ability to ask questions 100-fold. Like if I'm sitting here working in Ruby and all of my developers are Kotlin developers, there's only so many questions I can ask them. But if we're both working in Kotlin, I can be like, hey, I don't understand what's going on here. And someone can look at it and they already know the language. So they can already help me out and say, hey, here's what's going on. Here's why this is happening. So I highly recommend working in whatever language your developers are working in, whatever your code base is written in. Or if you've got a big enough test team, whatever everyone else is using. For me personally, I work at an agency. So I think in the past 6 months, I've worked in Kotlin, Java, Swift, Python. I've worked in like a dozen different languages, it feels like. And it turns out Kotlin and Java are very different. That was a surprise for me. And it can be a little bit difficult to sort of hold that in your brain and be able to remember, okay, which language am I in? What am I doing? So if you're writing in the language your developers are writing in, you can get a lot more help. Or if you can say, hey, this is how I would do it in this language. How do I do it in, how do I say this in your language? That can also be really useful. Let's see, I was a tester for a short time before moving to another team, and I really disliked testing. Oh, my heart. What is it that you love so much about testing, and what are the biggest factors in making a tester successful? This is an excellent question. Oh man, okay. What do I love about testing? Freaking everything. Okay. So I got into testing by accident, like 90% of us do. I was a support engineer for a long time, and I love being a support engineer because I felt like I was helping people with problems. I accidentally did DevOps for a while and really did not like DevOps because I was just creating problems at that point. But I moved over into quality assurance because people were like, hey, it's basically support, but before the users get the project. Like, oh, well, that's kind of cool, right? So that's what I really love about testing, is the human element to it. I'm solving problems for people that they don't know they have, or I'm investigating problems that they do have. There's a lot of logic puzzle to it, because it's not always super clear that this is the error that should happen, or this is why this error isn't happening. It's a logic puzzle that I can chew on and pull apart and look at and dive deeply into. And for me, that's incredibly satisfying. And all the projects I work on have people. I'm working on a project right now called Vocable, that is a head tracking app where you can type letters and spell out words and say things for people that are paralyzed. And the idea that I am literally helping people speak is incredibly fulfilling for me. And I know that if I get this wrong, there's a Chinese grandmother who can no longer talk to her granddaughter. And that kind of drives me, because I want to be good for that person. I want to be that person and make sure that she can be happy. In a lot of the other testers I talk to, it's about problem solving. You are solving a set of problems that you don't know exist yet, or that other people don't know exist. And you're moving through something in kind of a logical, interesting way. It's very much a dungeon scrolling game. Like, you're going here, you're going to hit some point where you have to stop. You have to solve that problem, and then you get to keep going on. So that's what I really like about testing. And I think what makes people successful as testers is the ability to step into the shoes of our users and understand why they move through apps and what they do to move through them. I like to think of it, our apps are a moment in time. I only have your attention for this moment in time. Before that, you were doing something, you were something. After you get done with my app, you're gonna do something else, you're gonna be something else. This is just one teeny tiny sliver of the cake that is your life. And it's my responsibility to make sure that that slice of cake is delicious. So that's what I think makes people successful. Does anyone else have an idea about what makes testers successful?
I mean, as far as being successful, systems thinking is going to be super duper important, because like the problems that you encounter are often going to be about an interaction between multiple systems. Like, that's why they exist in the first place. The developers aren't creating bugs on purpose. They're missing these interactions. And so, like, if you can reason about what's causing that, that's going to help you so much.
I think that's a really important thing you just said.
Go ahead.
That developers aren't creating bugs on purpose. Like, this isn't a character flaw. They're not being jerks. They're doing their job to the absolute best of their ability, and you are there to help them be better, and they're there to help you be better. So they're not doing it on purpose. is really important.
I was going to say, I think a little bit of rebelliousness is good. A lot of times we are kind of describing, this is supposed to do this and then this and then this. And, I want a tester that's going to be like, yeah, but what if I do that instead of this thing that you said I should do? Because, sometimes the reason that it's so valuable to have really good testers is like, I changed this thing over here and it breaks something that nobody thinks has any relationship to that. So they're really the ability to kind of, yeah, you told me what it's supposed to do or what I'm supposed to do, but I'm gonna do something different is important.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the systems thinking in a way, because it is a lot of complex systems that are coming together, that are interacting with each other. And honestly, humans are a complex system too, and they're interacting with complex systems. Things gonna get crazy, y'all. So it's interesting to put that together. Sorry, I figured y'all were tired of looking at my cat for a minute.
I like cats, I think. But that's fine. So Teresa had a question. What is it? How do you ensure that automated tests are correct in testing what they should be?
You ask other people.
Ooh.
Dante, what do you think? A lot of times, so there's two parts of that question. There's the kind of emotional part of that question, like, are we testing, or I guess the philosophical part, are we testing what we should be testing kind of overall? And then is the specific piece of code testing the thing that I think the specific piece of code is testing? So with that last bit, you ask other people. You get someone else to run through your code and say, okay, here's what I'm asserting on, here's what I'm doing. Is this doing what I expect it to do? The answer is going to generally be yes, no, or maybe, and that'll help you tweak your test, and it'll help you tweak that gut instinct that you have whenever you look at a piece of code to figure out what it's testing. The philosophical part of that, like, are we testing what we think we're testing, or what we should be testing, is what makes you a senior tester versus a low entry-level tester. When you are doing entry-level testing, you're really just testing the things someone else tells you to test. When you move into mid-level, you're starting to think about edge cases. You're starting to think about things that aren't specifically stated. And when you get into like being an actual senior tester, that's when you start really noshing on the question of, should we even be testing this? And it's going to come down to, what's the return on investment? Why are we testing this? What do we get out of testing this? Recently, I had a suite of tests where I was like, let's delete these, all of them. Everyone's like, oh no, but then we wouldn't have any tests. I'm like, right, we wouldn't. They're not testing functionality that anyone's using or even exists. One of my favorite examples of this is login tests. You almost never need login tests specifically, because almost all of your other tests are gonna test login. If they're testing something that's behind authentication, they probably need to go through the login flow. So why would you have specific tests to test login if it's tested in every single test? So, like I said, that gets a little bit more philosophical and deep, and I could probably talk about it for about 4 hours. But I hope it kind of gives you an idea of why we test what we test.
Yeah, I think a good starting point is also to just ask yourself what you learn if the test fails.
Yes.
So, you know, if a test fails, like, what have you learned? What action will you take? And if the answer is to like run your test suite again because that test always fails, then that's one you don't need to have.
Agreed. One of the things I like to espouse pretty aggressively is automation doesn't find defects. It just gives you information. It is just telling you if the thing it expects to be there is there or not. A human has to come in and determine if that's a defect or not. So if your automation isn't giving you information that's important, then you probably don't need that test.
That's why manual test is very, very good testing. I know automation is the way to go nowadays. I talk to management and this is exactly what they say, automation. And that's what we're doing also, but I prefer to do manual along with automation. So you're testing both aspects. If something breaks, at least, hey, you did this automation or I did this, but yet, look, it caught it here, even though you're supposed to catch it here, you know? So.
I like to think of that as the automation first mindset. Like you're doing the manual testing, but as you're doing the manual, you're also starting to write the automation. It's almost happening in parallel. I find it's good to step away from that after a while, just because I will sometimes start to think too procedurally, and users don't always think procedurally.
Yeah, so ideally what we do is first we write the manual test case and then do the automation after the fact. So after manual is like completed, then go to automation. So then in Selenium or .NET, we can, you know, test it later and something happens that she caught something or I caught something after the fact. And it's like, oh yeah, look, we found a problem here. So Irene,
That's
by the way, if you're hiring, I am looking for an opportunity.
Yeah, I was just looking for the thing on our board. I don't know, I'll try and find it.
I mean, that sort of leads into a follow-up question that Teresa had. That was, when should we design a test? Like before, during, or after development?
Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is yes, but
It depends on what you're testing and what your relationship with your developers is like. Quite honestly, as soon as the acceptance criteria is written for the feature, that's when I design the test if I've got the time. Because it will often find holes in the acceptance criteria, and it will be a chance for me to set my developers' expectations and my expectations before any code is written. I find testing to be a lot about expectations. I have expectations, my devs have expectations, product people have expectations, users have expectations, and part of my job as a tester is to wrangle all of those cats together and figure out what if the expectations of all of these parties are being met, or help reset those expectations. So if I can write the tests super early, that is a way for me to set expectations fast. Even if I'm doing pseudocode or test cases or doing scenario-based testing, Gherkin, whatever, any of that is a great way to sort of test the acceptance criteria before there's any code written. So the answer is yes.
And we also had one more question from the chat, which was like, can you give a short overview of like test automation tools and frameworks, like that you think people should know and be familiar with? I think especially if you're looking to like get into testing and test automation as a field.
Sure, there's a ton of them. I can tell you the 4 that I'm most familiar with. So XCUI test for testing Swift and Xcode applications. So anything on iOS, that's great. Love it. There is Espresso for testing anything on Android, and that can either be Kotlin or Java. Kotlin is so much nicer, y'all. Sorry if there's any Java fans. On web, you've got Test Cafe, and you've got Cypress, and a couple other smaller groups, but Test Cafe and Cypress seem to be the more popular ones right now. In addition to that, you've got Appium and Selenium, which are generally more cross-platform. I don't love cross-platform solutions because I feel like they are neither solutions nor actually cross-platform. I like to test natively, so that's what I like. I think the framework you should be familiar with is the one that lets you move forward in the job you want to have. So if you want to test mobile applications, look at XCUI test, look at Espresso. If you want to test web applications, look at Cypress, look at Test Cafe, look at some of the web frameworks. If your job is using Appium, look at Appium. A lot of this is going to be incredibly situational. And honestly, that's what testers are. We are probably the most agile people on your development team because we're always having to be someone different, look at someone different, test different features, test them different ways. We have to do different kinds of testing, like performance testing, load testing, automation, all of these things we need to do. So I would say look at the things that get you to the place you want to be in your career. It feels like a little bit of a cop-out answer, but I think it's really important to be looking forward while we're looking at frameworks.
Yeah, it's a broad question anyway. And like I've also done a lot of testing in the past, so you get to hear my 2 cents also, which is that I sort of think of Selenium as being the native solution for web applications. So like, you know, I agree that, you know, your native solution is probably the better one, and like Selenium is that for web, at least that's how it feels to me. And Microsoft Coded UI is kind of the native solution for Windows Desktop if you are working in that space.
Yeah, I don't think I've worked on a Windows anything in 10 years. Actually started on Red Hat Linux and then jumped straight over to companies that used exclusively Macs, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, I've done testing for a number of Windows applications, which I don't know how common that is anymore, but
yeah, all of ours are Android or iOS or web, mobile first. Teresa, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Yeah, let me unmute here. We have situations in when I have a whole solution that I'll have certain kinds of users that are going to do some actions in a portal. And these actions are going to, for example, push a message to a device or talk to an application that is in a device or in a different website. So I would need, for the integration test, I need to observe both things. So my test script basically has to issue commands, log into the portal with one set of credentials, and then log in on the application on the device with a different set of credentials, and I have to see the action and reaction happening, an action on the portal that gives a reaction on the device and vice versa. So how I'm trying to think about what kind of tools are better fitted for that, because then I don't have a native web or a native mobile in that case that's going to cover both things.
What I would start thinking about doing in that case is mocking some data. So if we know that there's two halves of the system, if we can independently verify that the two halves of the system behave like we expect, then that can really simplify our testing and give us fewer places where the tests are going to break down.
No, I understand the mocking part. This is something we have already, but we do need to do an integration test ultimately. And the system works integrated. So just the mocking doesn't assure that the integration is going to work.
So do you mean, when you say integration, do you mean the portal sending the information to the other website?
An action on the portal is going to send the push notification to the device, for example. Or an action in the portal is going to send some message on an MQTT that is going to be captured by the device, that is going to send to a Bluetooth device that's connected to a mobile phone or things like that. So I need to be able to test the whole path. I can mock everything. So this is going to be unit tests basically, because I'm testing each part individually, but we need to be able to test the whole thing talking to each other.
This is a little bit farther outside my automation experience than I think I can really speak to. Does anyone else have more experience with this kind of situation?
Yeah, so my sense is that these systems are more tightly coupled than they should be. And if this is, like, generally when things are hard to test, that's a good indication that things are poorly designed. And that fixing the design of it to be more testable is going to be good for everyone. It's going to make things more maintainable and more testable. And so, like, ideally you would have these systems separated from each other so that you could, like, your test for one could set data in the other that it needs to have, and then just execute the test on, like, from one perspective. And so this would be two tests for two different systems rather than a single test of, like, your whole application ecosystem, your whole multi-application ecosystem for that matter.
Well, no, for example, if I have a portal that I'm going to generate some marketing campaign that is going to get all the people that register to that campaign are going to receive push notification. I'm going to test the portal and think, but how can I assure that the push notification made it to the device and it showed the proper picture, it showed the proper content and everything? So this has to be an end-to-end test. And it's not a matter of being decoupled or not.
So, I mean, again, like my sense is that if that has to be run all as one test, then everything's too tightly coupled and that needs to be fixed.
Now,
And
how
that's a
do you
development
decouple
problem.
a push notification test then? I
Well-
have to send a push notification from it initiates outside of the mobile device. And
Yeah, so-
I'm going to see the result of the mobile device. There's no way to decouple that. It's already decoupled.
So like if you need to test this flow, like that probably just has to be a manual test. I don't think you can automate it. But if you want to, like if you are trying to create automated tests around this functionality, you should have automated tests for entering the like the marketing campaign and seeing that that's registered in the databases or whatever, and then testing that sends notifications to, or like sends messages to your notification system, and that your notification system can trigger pushes to devices, and then that devices will display those notifications correctly. And like all of those are different tests.
Yeah,
That's how I'd
again,
approach it
they're
too.
going to be individual tests. Yeah, they're going to be individual tests, and I'm not testing the integration path then. So this type of test would be if I need to verify specifically the integration, then you think these are non-automatable tests then.
It doesn't sound like the return on investment for automating them is going to be
I'm not sure I
high
understand.
enough to do that.
Okay.
Essentially, if I know that the portal is outputting the thing I expect, like if I can verify that it's saying, okay, yes, this is in the right state for a push notification to happen, and then I can verify that my device says, oh, if things are in this state, then the push notification happens, I would consider that very good. And then if I needed to do something to bridge that gap, I think it would need to be manual, like Jen was saying.
Okay.
You might want to put the question out on Twitter. I know that seems like kind of a silly thing to say, but there may be someone out there that has a different angle on it that could provide a little more help, or in a Slack group if you're in any testing Slack groups.
Yeah. I mean, I think the problem is that you're trying to test like the integration of at least 3 systems here. And I think like automated tests for any 2 of those systems is probably doable, but adding that 3rd system like increases the complexity exponentially, and it's not worth doing.
More complexity is more fragility. Anyone else got any more questions or anything you want to say? I think we grabbed the questions that were in chat, but if I missed any, feel free to unmute and just let your mouth do the talking.
Jenny, thank you for your time. I have to attend to my kids, but this was a very good session, and I look forward to another one going forward, because this could motivate some of us, you know,
Please
on
do.
some of the things that you talk about. I actually like it. So you and Jennifer both.
I also want to encourage everybody to give talks at your local meetups. They are incredibly important, and this is the lifeblood of our community. This is how we get to know each other, how we start talking about what the future looks like. If you don't think you have an idea for a talk, please shoot me an email, jenny.bramble@gmail.com. I will shoot you my proposal worksheet, and I will help pull a talk out of your brain.
Thank you.
But not like in a creepy doctor kind of way, but in a healthy, nice way. Oh, no one is doomed if you're not a good coder. Automation is way easier than writing application code. You just need good people around you that can tell you when you've royally messed something up. Cool. I think that about covers it.
Yeah.
It's late on the East Coast, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's late for you.
That's only like
Well,
9.
Still, like, thank you so much for doing this. This has been great, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, and thank you everybody for joining us today. You know, we love having you, and like, this is why we do these things. So, yeah, I guess with that, I will say goodnight to everybody and let you all get on with your evenings.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you so much, Jenny. This was such a good talk.
Thank you, Jordan.
All right. See you guys later.
Thank you.